Tonight, we talk Druids. It's time to get uncanny.
This Uncanny Earth is dedicated to the memory of Todd David Anderson.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 183, Druids. Yes, tonight we'll be talking about these enigmatic figures from Celtic past. Did they exist? Did they not exist? Nobody's really 100% sure, but we're going to get into that tonight. So, as always, I am your host, Robert Solomon, and with me is the one, the only, always hated, never duplicated, usually faded. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Spider.
I don't even know what that means.
You don't?
No, I'm like, I hear based and faded and stuff, and I'm just like, what think? I don't know.
What think, huh?
I was just starting to figure out what on flick or on fleek or on flick or whatever it is. I don't even know how you say it. I was just getting used to that and yeet, and now we're already on like based and stuff. I don't know.
Well, no, faded is an old term. Faded isn't a new term. It's an older term from the 1990s. Don't know if you remember that growing up.
I got some hazy memories around then. I can't really say much about that.
Because you were faded.
If that's what that means, then that's probably
accurate. You were faded. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for your favorite part of the show and my favorite part of the show. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Dad Jokes.
It's time for Dad Jokes. And that's it, the only good part of that segment.
He always has to tell me because I can't hear it. You guys hear it, I don't hear it. So,
it's the only bit of power I have.
That's it. What do you call the fish wearing a bow tie?
Oh, I know this one. Don't do this. Oh, you're gonna do it. Oh man.
Sophisticated.
You could have gone with a different joke, but you went with this one just for the halibut.
Just for the halibut.
See, at least I was a good sport.
That's about the only thing you're good at.
Yeah, well, sports? I don't know. I'm terrible at that. Like, ooh boy, am I terrible at that.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Of all the things I'm bad at, sportsing
Sports and probably wearing jorts.
I don't think I've ever done that in my life, but
I don't think you've ever worn shorts in your entire existence as a human being on this planet. Maybe like when you were a kid.
Yeah, when I was a kid, because that's what my parents bought. They bought shorts for me to wear, because that's what happens. Your parents buy you your clothes for a while, right?
They buy... I really love how you're like, yeah, my parents bought me shorts. I hated every second of it. It's very dark for you, wasn't it?
Maybe. I don't remember that much time either. That faded span in between kind of, crushed a lot of those.
Eliminated that whole part of your childhood?
Yeah, there's a lot missing in there.
You need one of those regression hypnotherapists.
Probably. So public service announcement for everybody out there, don't do any of the things I did as a kid.
Well, we're not going to talk about what you did as a kid. That's for Uncanny After Dark.
That's right.
Which we will be doing. We're going to be doing episodes of this Uncanny Earth, but After Dark, where we're going to give a more adult oriented opinion about things in the world going on. We're going to be starting that up in April. So look forward to that in April. It'll be pre-recorded. That one we will not be doing live because it's just easier for us to do it in a setting where we can just be each other, and then I will probably edit it so that we can go from there, and then we can just do however we want to do it. That will be coming up once, like I said, in April, probably. Let me look at my calendar real quick.
And that'll be a true opinion show, which is another reason why it's being recorded rather than a live chat, because when people get into their opinions, I mean, we're not immune to the effects of people getting in like, oh, you're and getting angry about things, and, you know, this way you can listen to it, and if you have an issue with it, you can kind of stew about it and think it over, and then you can come at us like a day or so after and be like, hey, I had an issue with what you said on After Dark, and here's what I think. But you can come at it calmly, and then we can answer you calmly instead of the heat of the moment while we're recording it. Because we might be like real like heated when we get into it, and just like, oh, I got this thing we got to talk about today. Oh, and you know, this way everybody's calm and collected, and we can have a good discussion about it.
And there might be a couple swears and things like that on the show. So that's why we're going to be putting that more towards the adult audience. Also, that will be a Patreon-only thing. So if you are not a Patreon member, you will not be able to listen to it. So make sure you're a Patreon donor. We have some pretty good things coming up. That's just one of them. We're going to be having some Uncanny Trip footage that you will not be able to see unless you are a member of this Uncanny Earth. And I don't know what Spider's doing with the... What are you doing with the Spirits Club videos?
I'm still trying to do them. I have to open up my space here, and we have to juggle some finances so I can keep the purchases coming, because
I don't mean, like, what about the old ones I meant?
Oh,
those get uploaded?
No, because I have to do some editing on them, and I don't have the sort of editing software that you had.
I mean, I can do it. I have the software.
No, because that defeats the purpose, because you were going to, and then your computer, even though you have the software, your computer was being like an expletive about it. So,
well, actually, it's better now. I had a talking to, you know, I kind of gave it a good old fashioned 1-2, what have you, you know.
Mm-hmm. It's possible
like
if I get those, if in the near future I get a second workstation, which is something we're talking about, so we can reduce my on-air noise, as you guys may have heard. We've already made a few strides to that. Actually, we got to talk about that right after this, right?
Yes.
Yes. So, but I'm going to try to be improving the overall quality from my end with a new workstation, and maybe I'll have some extra video capacity on that side as well, and then it won't be an issue.
And that's the whole goal of this thing too, is to make this podcast sound even better each time, because when we first started out with Google Hangouts, boy, was that sure a hot mess. That was probably the worst sounding audio. And I want to go back, we're probably going to go back here, I think, maybe in a couple months, and redo all of those shows. Probably like the first 10 episodes, I think, was the issues from like Ancient Aliens, which we did a redo of that one. You guys can go check that one out. And I think that was it. I don't think we went back to the other ones. But I would 100% love to get back into doing those older shows. But maybe this time we do a updated version, so maybe we got some new information on the episode, and then we could go from there. I'm trying to think of a good time for things to go live. Our YouTube stuff will be live on Wednesdays and Fridays. Wednesdays will be clips. Fridays will be whole episodes. So make sure you're prepared for that. That will be. So I'm thinking the After Dark stuff maybe on a Monday. I'll edit it. So it'll take a lot of the ums and the everything else like that, and that'll be it. I don't know if we'll probably have a theme song. We'll have to get another theme and ending song. But I think that if we do that, we'll be okay though. I think we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing there's a lot of reorganizing going on behind the scenes. Actually, like we're shuffling money around, we're shuffling time slots, we're doing a lot of things on both ends here that haven't come out to be talked about just yet, but there's a lot going on, and so it's going to be a little messy, I think, until all that happens. So if anybody's kind of like, this shows have been kind of bleh, don't worry, just ride it out a little bit. Everything's shuffling around a little bit.
Yeah, every day we're shuffling, so we have to keep things moving and grooving with pure attitude. And I don't know, be rooting, be shooting. And
you had me at the shuffling because shuffling is something I'm
that's your thing.
Good at, but
that's probably what you're best at, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't know, but yeah, we're gonna figure out a good time slot to release those on the Patreon site. So I'm thinking a Monday because Sunday I can get to it, edit it. And it'll be another hour show, and hour shows aren't too bad to edit. Even if we have to, we can do a quick half hour, a debate, whatever. We'll figure it out. I'm looking forward to doing more with this channel, and this way you guys can do what you have to do. Also, I forgot about this, and I want to give a quick shout out to Teresa's Haunted History of the Tri-State .blogspot. I want to make sure this is right because this is a long... .com. So, Teresa's Haunted History of the Tri-State .blogspot.com. On her post from March 8th, 2022, a couple days back, she cites us as her favorite YouTube channel. We come in at number 6 with no order at all to it. That was just the number we were at. And she goes on to say, I've been listening to this Uncanny Earth podcast for a long time now. And it's always been one of my favorites. Lots of West Virginia-based stories / locations are featured. But seriously, they talk about anything weird and ... uncanny. It's a great show. And they're in the process of loading up the new YouTube channel with content. So follow along. We're going to be doing that. We're going to be moving some stuff over to YouTube. We might move to YouTube permanently, I'm hoping, because I'm not a big fan of iHeartRadio's acquisition of Spreaker. A lot of things got kind of taken away, and a lot of our stuff kind of changed. Business cards had to get changed. It was just a mess, and I'm not so much of a fan of it now. It's okay, but I feel like with iHeartRadio taking over, there was just something about it that switched, and I wasn't a fan. We'll talk more about that as it comes along. So, and we're also going to be selling some merch. Me and my co-host have acquisitioned some merch creating items. As you guys well know, my co-host got a 3D printer, which is freaking awesome. And I've got some things to make t-shirts. So we're going to make t-shirts, probably just ship them out from here. We're going to get price points and designs up to you. I'm thinking that we're going to end up having to put a website out there at some point, so which shouldn't be too bad. I don't know if you know anything about web design. I know a little bit.
I used to do web editing, but my old websites were like back when everybody could get an Angel Fire account for free.
Oh yeah.
And that was my HTML editing. So I had my HTML editing for Dummies book that I would consult every so often. So I'm a bit out of practice.
I actually have probably that same book that you have because it is probably pretty much the same thing to me. It's fun. It's just computer programming, but you use the book. Also, a good thing to do is you can actually read the coding that websites have. If you go into, I believe it is Inspect, and then it'll show how they've coded their webpage. Then you can follow along. I'm not saying you copy exact. Try to make that your webpage. But it'll show you how to set certain things up, videos, stuff like that, if you need a better understanding of how things work. So that's just something for you guys that we have coming down the pipelines. So, yeah. Tonight, episode 183, Druids. Now, Druids are described as people from Britain and France who are a member of the learned class among the ancient Celts. The earliest known records date back to roughly the 3rd century BC, so roughly 300 BC to 201 BC. The name comes from the Celtic word Dori, defined as knower of the oak tree. And Julius Caesar is considered the principal source of knowledge regarding the Druids, though many thought he got some of his information from the philosopher Posidonius. He gives his take regarding the two groups of Druids in Gaul. In Gaul, there are two groups. There were Druids and noblemen, and both were held with high honor. Now, Caesar goes on to say that Druids took charge of both public and private sacrifices. They judged public and private quarrels and levied out penalties. If the penalties were disobeyed, those who did disobey would not be allowed to commit sacrifices. And that is considered to be the most heinous punishment one could obtain, because the sacrifices were everything to the Druid and the Druid class, and they would sacrifice everything from animals to people. Now, it is thought that Caesar spoke of them as a highly developed society. Reason being, because when Rome went through conquering different lands and barbaric tribes, Rome wanted to make itself look like that it was the height of civilization, that it was the end-all, be-all, empire of empires that would last for forever. And so to think that Rome came in, conquered all these places, some being maybe sophisticated, Rome said, you know what, we conquered them, so you know what that makes us? That makes us even more sophisticated. So just a little FYI when you're going through here listening to us talk tonight about Rome and Druids. You got to understand the Roman society and how they acted, and then understand the Celtic society and how they acted. Now, there are plenty of sources for people who had both religious knowledge and abilities in the Iron Age of Europe. However, at present, no artifacts have been presently unearthed to forge a link between the Druids of old and those with religious tendencies. Now, there is evidence of ancient monuments used for ceremonial purposes. Bryn Celyn, Welsh for Mound in the Dark Grove, shows that the original tomb, which is located in the northwest corner of Wales, Angsley, is pockmarked with numerous Neolithic and Bronze Age stone monuments. Bryn Celyn is one such monument. Now, it is said that the tomb was created about 5,000 years ago and added onto over the centuries. This kind of reminds me of the Great Serpent Mound in Athens, Ohio. I think we talk about this once every episode at this point. And how Native Americans would come in and clean the place up. The reason Bryn Celyn was so famously linked to Druids was because Tacitus, a Roman philosopher, historian, wrote that when Roman soldiers invaded Anglesey, this is a rough one. Anglesey, this is a rough one. They noticed the Druids among the military defenders of the island and shouting curses at the invaders. The one thing to note, like I said, there's going to be a lot of bias because whenever you have a group of people that aren't well known through writing or through history, because the Druids were oral people. What they did, how they did it, what they knew was all passed down through oral tradition. So you're not going to have a lot of stuff on the Druids. And what you do have is later Druidic knowledge. You don't have a lot of the pre-Britain concepts of Druids. You just have basically word of mouth. So you have Caesar, who was this big emperor, talking about the Druids, and you don't know if he is giving them more of a special treatment because of who he was or who they were, making it look like here's these people and I have conquered them. And they were tough to conquer, and that makes me even more powerful. Because nobody wants to walk in, historians and stuff won't be like, yeah, they just walked in and took over the place. That might be a mention. But the Druids, because of what they did and who they were, and I think the mysteriousness behind it, is really what tells the tale. Now, a Druid was made chief, and when he passed on, there was another to take his place. If there were several that could fill that position, however, there would be a vote cast. Or, if it came down to it, they were not above using violence to solve the problem. Now, every year, Druids would assemble at a sacred place in the territory of the Carnutes, which is a Gaelic tribe dwelling in an extensive territory between Sequana and the Liger rivers. This was believed to be the center of all Gaul. This is where legal disputes would be settled through the judgment of the Gauls. Caesar goes on to record that the Druids abstained from warfare and did not pay tribute, much like the Amish here in Ohio and Pennsylvania. They don't go to war, and they don't pay taxes. You guys didn't know that. Now, because of this, many joined the order. Ancient verse, natural philosophy, astronomy, and lore of the gods were all part of their training. Some of these people spent 20 years in training, and they believed that the immortal soul was postulated by the Druids, and it was thought that the soul was passed on to the next person upon death. So you have the Romans jumping in here with all this information, but they still make them look very barbaric, which anybody that wasn't Roman was considered barbaric. They didn't really talk of anybody else to the high esteem that they talked about themselves. I think maybe they talked about the Greeks, but they were basically the Greeks part two. I mean, they even had the same gods, just different names. Human sacrifices were offered for those that were gravely sick or in danger of death in battle. Now, the interesting thing about Druids, at least my opinion, and there was a movie about this, they would construct these giant wooden men made out of wicker. They would stuff criminals, animals, and even innocent people into these giant wicker statues. Now, wicker, for those of you who don't know, is much like wood. If anybody's ever seen a wicker chair, which were popular in the 80s, 70s, 80s, I think everybody's grandmother had one. My grandmother had one, so I know.
Still good for porch furniture and stuff, like for outdoor.
Which is basically what they were. Yeah, basically. And they would stuff all these people in there and then light the thing on fire. Yikes. That's not fun at all. What do you think about that, Spider? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's crazy stuff, and then there's so many stories about the Druids being like really well learned and having all this knowledge, but also being really, really brutal in ways like this. Like the whole human sacrifice thing has become almost synonymous when you talk about Druids. And what's weird is that we don't have really any direct evidence for any of it, but we don't really have a choice but to kind of connect them because this is the evidence that we do have to work with. Like you said, they didn't pass down any written records. They weren't, like, something about their religion, apparently, if you believe the people who did write about them, said that they could not write about their own rituals. They couldn't write, like, while they were literate and they could write, they chose not to because it was against their spirituality. And different historians have pointed out things about that. Like, historian Jane Webster says that individual Druids are unlikely to be identified archaeologically. And so it's kind of interesting. Like, we have this mystical kind of thing that they do, and this high placement and their nobility, and then we have this sheer brutality that's connected to them.
Right. And that's the thing, a lot of times, it's so much different than other societies that we have a copious amount of written records for. Mm-hmm. We don't have the amount that we do about other tribes and peoples, like we do, say, Native American tribes. We have more information about them than we do the Druids. Now, there are still tribes in the world that we have next to no information on, and probably tribes that existed, came and went, and we don't have anything at all. We never will. They might have went extinct before we get a chance to study or understand them. Real quick, my guy Zach is in the comments. Zach says, "Hey guys, hope you guys are having a great night. Keep up the great work." Thank you, Zach. We appreciate you very, very much. Also, real quick, did not get a chance to say this at the beginning of the show, but want to get it out here now. Starting next week, March 18th, we will be doing the show on Fridays because it will be much easier for us to do the show. So just to let you guys know. So don't worry, we're still here. We're just moving a day further into the week. It just makes things a lot easier for both of us because of our schedules. So Friday, 10 to 11, same time. We're not switching up times on you guys. We're not that cool. We're switching up just a day. So from here on out, Fridays, unless otherwise noted. So just a little heads up for you guys. I didn't want to I wanted to get that out of the way before I forgot. Now, let's move on to some rituals. Now, there's not a lot of recorded rituals, just once again, stuff that's been passed down by hearsay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Druidic rituals were usually held in forest clearings, and it wasn't until much later that Druids, after being suppressed by Rome and Tiberius, relegated their rituals to sacred buildings. So you couldn't practice this stuff out in the air. And the ironic thing about all of this, Rome would convert to Christianity. And you have places in the world today where Christianity is persecuted and people have to practice their beliefs in a home. They can't practice them out in the streets or outside for fear of persecution. So I just thought that was a little ironic that would, come down the line. Pliny the Elder, as many of you have probably heard, wrote about the Druids' love for both mistletoe and human sacrifice. Two very, very different things.
Mystical and brutal. That's that same link.
Yeah, mystical murder. There you go. He goes on to say, and I quote, "To murder a man was to do the act of the highest devoutness, and to eat his flesh was to secure the highest blessings of health." Now we have other civilizations where they would actually eat the heart, or even take a bite of the heart to drink the blood, because it was thought if you ate the heart, you were eating the life force of whatever it was that you had killed. Aztecs, all of that would eat the human heart to gain powers and things like that. Now, we look at things like Judaism, where blood has to be completely taken out of the meat because it cannot have a trace of blood, because based off the same thing, the life energy of things is blood. And so it's a different dynamic between the Druids and the Christian Romans, who, even though it says in the Bible that the communion is drinking of the blood of Christ, while not consuming blood, it is thought the life force and things like that. And so here you have them doing it, but the Romans saying, you can't do that. You can't be doing that. Don't do that. Don't do that. So it's kind of interesting that there is that separation, but they are kind of together in that, like the wine being the blood of Christ and the bread being the body. Yes, it's different in terms of symbolism with one and the other actually drinking the blood, but I just still think that was kind of interesting. Once again, Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus describes a battle in Wales where the Druids covered their altars.
Turn into the deer man here.
Right, where Cornelius Tacitus describes a battle in Wales where the Druids covered their altars with the blood of captives and consulted their deities through human entrails. Once again, a key thing to note here, people, is that Romans looked at pagans as presenting a threat to their way of life. Reason being is the Druids held a certain power over their community that was under Roman control. So if you think about it, here is a group of people that don't go to war and don't pay tribute. So taxes and war. You're not going to have troops for your army because they're not going to do it, and they're not going to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So you don't want these people just running around all willy-nilly, getting more people in and more converts and more converts. What happens is you get so many converts in something like that now you have a real threat of being overthrown. And the one thing Rome didn't like was competition. And that's obvious. We look at the battle between Rome and Hannibal Barca, Rome and different barbarian factions, and we see that Rome doesn't like competition. They were a certain way. They didn't want to deal with heathen gods. And that's just how it was. Now, the reign of Augustus in 27 BC would be the actual start of the suppression of the Druids by Rome. Something else to note here is that there are virtually no historical documentation regarding the history of the Druids from pre-Christian Celts. And like we said before, so much of what is written by Rome could very well be fabricated or half truths. Because it was speculated that the Druids were discussed in medieval literature, but at that point they were just healers and magicians. They weren't this other class. And once again, their oral history, you only have so much you can say before it gets lost in translation. Or like playing telephone, if you get 10 people to play telephone, by the end of the telephone, the message will change. And so that's what I think happened, this oral history. And then when it got to somebody that would tell Rome, you don't know if that person was just saying, hey, listen, these people are crazy, they're barbaric. You don't know if that person had an agenda against the Druids, or if he wanted to put the Druids so high up in terms of barbaric actions that it would hold in the history books for all of time. That's the one thing about this that I found interesting, because when I went to actually research Druids, I was like, oh man, there's going to be at least something. There's going to be at least one or two things here that I'm going to be able to pull out and enjoy. Boy, was I wrong. There were zero things. Just what Caesar said and what some of the Celts have said.
Most of the things that we supposedly, quote unquote, know about the Druids is actually stuff that has been kind of invented over the last couple of centuries. Like, there was a big resurgence in Druidic mythology and things like that in the 18th century, and that carried up into the 19th century. And now here in the 20th century, we have all these things that are supposedly Druidic and this and that, and it's been absorbed into certain Wiccan practices and a few other things. But a lot of it just kind of, somebody made it up somewhere. Somebody was like, hey, you know what? I think this was the Druids, and that was it. Like, nobody was able to contradict them, but they didn't have any evidence, so they just said it, they kept saying it, and it stuck. And most of the things, like, going back to some of our past couple of shows, we talked about the Fae, and we talked about the Celtic deities. Supposedly the Druids were proficient in Futhark and Ogham and stuff, but they didn't leave any written records, so that's impossible, right? So, all these things that are attributed to them are really up in the air. We kind of have no idea.
You're right. Not to mention that we don't know who converted to Christianity or who just kind of got lost in society. They thought, well, this way of life is dying. This isn't the way it's going to end up. I'll just blend into society. I'll go into this society, and then I'll just blend in. Nobody will know. I mean, if everybody pretty much looks alike for the most part, unless people in the city or village knew that you were a Druid, that's it. And then when the things died, they went their separate ways, and many probably assimilated into modern society. I mean, modern for the time. But you're right. Because there's no books written by Druids that we know about. I'm not saying that there probably couldn't be one somewhere. There might be an artifact somewhere. I'm not saying that because it's 100% possible. You can never rule it out, especially when we keep finding newer and newer things revolving around history. But to me, it seems more like, and I think it was the Aztecs that just disappeared. And it was said that they just assimilated into another society. It's quite possible this happened too with Druids. They just assimilated.
And that's what happened to, like, the Mayans, since you bring up South America. There are still technically Mayans today that they've traced with their DNA. Like, scientists have gone to small tribal villages and been like, hey, can we check you? And they're basically almost full-blooded Mayan, but they joined other, like, larger, more stable societies after their society collapsed. And even though they might not have intermarried a lot to dilute that, they've just been dwindling. Because that's just how it works. If you don't intermarry and if you don't intermingle like that, if you're just there as a part of the society but you keep yourselves, your bloodline is slowly going to fade away. And that's possibly what could have happened with the Druids. They could have been some particular bloodline even. And they've just been like, nah, we'll hang out with everybody else, we'll just pretend to be everybody else, but we're not going to mingle in that fashion. And they just died out.
Then they might have went underground practicing too. Their beliefs. like many Jews did during World War II. You know,
Yeah.
in Germany, you couldn't
Mhm.
at a certain point you couldn't practice your beliefs because it was against the law. So I think it's the same way with this. I think the Roman pressure was so serious sometimes that they just said, you know what, it's not worth the hassle. Hassle. It's not worth the hassle. It's not worth the headache.
If they were as
We'll
smart as
go
they
on.
were written to be about, then that's a very good possibility. Because if you're a smart person and you know that you have almost no real major numbers, like you're a very small tribal, insular group of people, and you see this big, like, massive war machine and this big society moving in, being like, this is the way it's going to be, you kind of have to think, well, I can run out there and be like, no, look at this, look at that, expletive, you're going to have to kill me. Or
Right.
you can just be like, okay, we'll do it your way. We're all going to split up, do our thing. We're going to still do our thing. We're just not going to tell you, but we're not going to, we're not going to hang out together as a group anymore. And that's how something like that basically falls apart.
And I think, too, with the whole idea of human sacrifice, it got frowned upon later on in society, even though you do have things like the different religious inquisitions that went on.
Mm-hmm.
It was still under the sort of Christian umbrella, if you will.
I never really thought about it that way. That's almost like a sacrifice, sort of. Like it's not supposed to be, but it kind of is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, and
good point.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think that what happened is once that happened, that's one thing because it's under the church. The church has supreme power; they can execute how they will.
Mm-hmm.
But here's another group that it looks weird to them because you're building a giant wicker man in the middle of the woods and stuffing it full of people and animals and setting it afire. Mind you, they did all kinds of brutality in these different religious inquisitions, right? We got to remember that the Catholic Church did punish itself. You had St. Ignatius of Loyola that would beat his back with a cat of nine tails instrument that would just tear flesh, and they would just whip their back as a form of penance. And there was other real sadistic things, drawing and quartering, stretching, all kinds of stuff. The Iron Maiden, burning at the stake, all this stuff. And then you have these same people saying what you're doing is barbaric. But once again, when you have a holy order that is large enough to where people can't question it, in a Druidic system that has no books, no documentation, they were probably a smaller group. And so what are you going to do? When you have, like he said, when you have this war machine that's just going through, you have to adapt or die. And many of them probably adapted, and still many of them probably died. But I think once they died, their way of life died as well. They weren't able just to pick up the pieces and go back to doing that because of the span of rule. And you can't go back to an old way of life if there's no place for you to go. Because if you do go to these open fields and do this open sacrifice, you're going to die. They're going to come through and say, what are you doing? Oh, you're not a convert. Okay, it's time to go. So to me, that mixed with no artifacts or anything like that leads me to believe that they were wiped out, and who wasn't wiped out assimilated. However, they did find something. So in 1984, the discovery of the Lindau Man in Cheshire, England, basically shed some light on the Druids and their practices. Now, the Lindau Man was found to have been stabbed, strangled, and left for dead in a bog, and his stomach contained mistletoe pollen. Now, this may have been a ritual sacrifice either by the Druids, or the man could have been a Druid himself. Something to note about Druid sacrifice. Sometimes they would stab the victims, or they would sacrifice their victims, and they would tell the future, or at least attempt to, by their death movements and the pooling of their blood. Something I've noticed with a lot of this. They paint the Druids as being highly intelligent. but then they paint them as barbarians.
Mm.
It's one or the other, I think. I don't think it's... I'm not saying you can't be smart and not sacrifice human beings. I believe you could be very intelligent and sacrifice human beings. But I think with knowledge and intelligence comes a form of, what's the word I'm looking here for? Morality, I want to say. Now, that's not always the case, but I think a lot of the time there is a sense of morality. What I think is, I think the Druids were kind of in the middle. I don't think they were this highly intelligent society. I think they were intelligent. I don't think they were highly intelligent, but I also don't think they were barbaric savages. Because I think that the human sacrifices did happen, because that was the thing.
Mm.
Human sacrifice has been around since times of old. But I think the way that they have portrayed these human sacrifices might be a little much, at least to me. Now, there was a sort of renaissance and resurgence of the Druids. That begins at the end of the 15th century. Now, Europeans wanted to define themselves more closely to groups, language, and culture to feel as one people. What they would do is they would go into their past to find heroic figures and thus found Druids to fit that narrative. Northwestern Europeans found them interesting due in large part because the Greeks and Romans found them equally as impressive. Between the years 1490 and 1530, 3 different nations took up the love for Druids and put them on a pedestal as wise and enlightened ancestors. Now, the Germans were the first because they were least associated with classical civilization. They've never actually associated with said Druids, but the overlap of modern Germany with ancient Gaul was kind of a way for them to circumvent that idea. The French would then make a fuss regarding Druid ancestry, and it wasn't long after that France's ally Scotland would bring Druids into the fold as their ancestors. The English and Welsh, while having the justification to do so, didn't really put the Druids as their heroic forefathers. This was due in large part to the English and Welsh having their own heroes in Christianity that were actually proven to exist. So there's really no need for them to pull people into their ideas that have no record of existing. Mm. Now, what the English did do with the Druids is put them in the history books as villains. Although in the 18th century, the union of England and Scotland into a massive state actually looked to Druids as their link in ancestry. The Welsh, while not taking up the mantle at the first, would come to utilize Druidic ideology to showcase their history. The Welsh end up taking up the Druid people and placing them as heroic icons. They would further go on to having a national anthem, the harp as the national instrument, and the daffodil as the national flower. The Eisteddfod is a competition of poets and musicians that came about in the 19th century with Druidic ideology represented in the opening ceremony, the Gorsid. This practice is still continued to this very day. Now, something that we need to understand here. At the beginning, nobody wanted anything to do with the Druids, but I think like all human beings, we want a common link to our ancestors. Both of us have talked ad nauseum about our ancestral links. Whether I bring up stuff about the Flatwoods Monster or my co-host brings stuff up about Hughestown, we both have wanted to go back to that, to our ancestors. And I think they wanted to do the same thing. And I think they kind of knew that Romans weren't their ancestral link, if you will. They didn't have the same history that early Britons did, or early Scots had, or Germanic tribes had. So at some point, they're like, listen, we have been Rome's whipping boy for so long. I don't want to be associated with Romans anymore. And so you have this sort of back to your roots idea that we don't want to be associated with something that kind of basically took us over. Now, the way they sort of reconciled this to the Protestant believers of Christianity, was via the idea that they were shown as the practitioners of good and original religion as revealed by Jehovah to the ancestors of humanity. In this regard, they are viewed as the least corrupted by idolatry and superstition, thus making them the actual natural converts to the Christian faith. This was also to remove the Druid idea that they were hostile. We have to remember, too, that Rome was very idolatrous. Before its conversion to Christianity, it had many gods, immoral acts going on.
Huge statues and things that you had to touch, or that you had to sacrifice to, or you had to pray to, or the statue supposedly would come to life and smite you.
Facts. And remember, the Romans persecuted both Christians and Druids. So that made the idea that the Druids practiced human sacrifice a lie to them, mind you. So that was kind of interesting. The next big chapter was the Victorian era of England, and what they did was they aligned with the Roman texts of barbarism and savagery rather than the respect. And it was sort of used as a way to point out how far England had come from a time of being stupid and non-intellectual to a place of enlightenment filled with modern ideologies and world supremacy. They viewed the primitive Britons as savages. And according to their social and technological way of life, or lack thereof, it gave the now advanced, and I use finger quotes, society a way to judge a previous society and sort of put on airs whenever they went out. Though I don't understand the reasoning, because back then, whatever. But it further gave the English ties to the Greek and Roman way of technological and societal advancement, thus regarding the knowledge and wisdom from the Greek and Roman society as classical. So here we have at first this sort of notion that, hey, we got to get back to our roots. We have to go back to who we once were as a people, as a nation. Let's identify with the Druids. But then you have the Victorian era of enlightenment, so to speak. And now it's, wait, they were barbaric. Rome and Greece wasn't, even though Rome and Greece was very barbaric, if you look up some of the practices, like Spider had just talked about, or you look at the mythology like Zeus and his millions of, women that he copulated with, they're not too different. The only difference is the Druids were more nature-oriented from what we know. But here, Victorian England said, you know what, we can throw away all those ideas of Roman barbarism because they converted to Christianity. So we can stop there, right, and just go from the Christian aspect. Funny thing about all of this is that as time progressed, Christianity would be looked on as barbaric because of folks like Charles Darwin to make way for a new prehistorical ideology with such things as evolution and the Big Bang Theory. It was no longer up to a divine creator that had created the universe, created the world, created people in it. It was all based on evolution from animals, fish, that the planets just sort of exploded and were here. So all of that got pushed out for sort of a new ideology to take root. And it's been that way now since then. That is sort of like the mainstay. There's a lack of wonder, and it's just, this is it. And it's just, I don't know. That's for an Uncanny After Dark episode where we can have that conversation. But to me, it just seems kind of sad in a way. I get it, though, and I think that the reason that Druidic society probably faltered was the human sacrifice aspect. You get to a point where it is barbaric in a sense. I mean, we have so many societies that practiced human sacrifice, whether it be child sacrifice, whether it be human sacrifice. I mean, sacrifice as a whole is a pretty barbaric thing. You still have cultures that do sacrifice chickens or goats, cows, sheep, all of that, you know. And one could say that we kind of sacrifice to get our meals, to get our meat products in a way. But most people, myself included, my co-host included, have never sacrificed an animal. At least I don't think you have. I know I haven't.
No, not like I don't. I've done some. I don't want people to take this the wrong way. I've done some ritually things, but nothing that's like, I don't get into the blood ritual stuff. I don't get into the animal sacrifice. I don't get into the Crowley kind of sacrificial stuff. I'm not going to say anything about it, but for anybody who out there who knows, if you know, you know, we don't get into that. Because we're a learned society. We're people who have adapted in ways that you kind of understand. You don't need these things to make the world work. And if you are a spiritual person, and if you do follow a deity of your choice, modern day people, most of us assume that our deity is a peaceful deity, and there's no reason to cause that kind of harm to something to please a deity.
Yes.
Because that deity isn't down here like smiting people left and right for breaking the rules. They're not down here like, oh, well, these people didn't do this thing, so we're all going to get our armor on and go fight them. That doesn't happen these days. I mean, there's some kind of people who go a little nuts, not to, be downing on anything mental health-wise, but some people get a little bit out there and they say, oh, so-and-so told me I needed to go on this killing spree. But we don't do that anymore. That's individual people who have some problems. And
or you'll have people that practice things like voodoo.
And
that's part of their.
And I get it. I mean, I don't like it, but I get it. I mean, I can't very well go down there and be like, you can't do that, because what's that going to do? They're just going to be like, fine, whatever. If I have any authority, they're just going to be like, okay, and then do it behind my back.
Which is usually what happens.
That is exactly what happened for a lot of that stuff. It was they tried to suppress that years and years ago, and it just, people are going to do what people are going to do, especially with spiritual beliefs. That's a belief that kind of defies logic a lot of the times. I mean, we all kind of have to admit to ourselves that spirituality kind of defies logical thought, and that's okay. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I can be a logical person and have some spiritual beliefs, even if they don't really mesh together all the time. I just know that I can't use one to necessarily override the other and go out and just be like, well, you didn't hopscotch 3 times this morning in accordance with the rules of whatever, so you must be burned inside a wicker man. No. It's... people are going to believe what they want to believe, and unless they're out stabbing people in the street, there's not really much you can do about it.
And I think, too, we all practice some form of ritual, whether we know it or not. Sometimes when somebody says, I hope this doesn't happen, and then you knock on wood, it's a ritual. You're knocking on wood to sort of negate the words that are coming out of your mouth. Something I wanted to say, and I don't know if you knew this, and we're going to bring this up, I think, let's see. So next week we're going to do an episode on St. Patrick's Day. I think that'd be a good episode to do. And I think the week after, which we might have to have on a Thursday because I have something coming out, so we might have to push that one on a Thursday, which is fine. It's not a big deal. I think we're going to do, at some point, I want to talk about Gnosticism. I don't know if we've hit that one yet. I don't think we have.
Not directly. We've touched it with other topics, but not as we've never given the full attack on, this is Gnosticism, Sunday at 9, bum, 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 bum.
Sunday at 9 Systism. I don't know what I'm doing. But I don't know if you know this, but there's a belief that the God of the Old Testament is different from the God of the New Testament. Mm-hmm. Don't know if you knew that. So.
That's interesting stuff. The demiurge and all that other kind of stuff. That gets into some things.
Sophia. Yes. People are like, what? Gnosticism.
That's a show that
Christian Gnosticism. There's Christian Gnosticism and there's Gnosticism. They are two different things. Believe it or not. They are two different things. So
yeah, that's a show that might aggravate some people.
If it does, it does. At this point, just deal with it. Gnosticism to me is fascinating. It's a Christian Gnosticism
it's super interesting.
Very fascinating. Because what people don't understand, the early Christians were basically splintered to the Ebionites and the Marcionites. The Marcionites and the Ebionites believed in the Jewish way of living. They believed that you had to keep the law, that Christ fulfilled it, and so you still have to keep it. While the Marcionites believed that he came to be the law, so you didn't have to follow that way anymore. And it's very intricate. There's a lot of intricacies through both. And then you have groups that splintered off of that, and you have different authors like Tertullian and Marcion and all of these people that wrote about Christianity. And then you have the Council of Nicaea. And it's really just this big whole thing that is just so fascinating to me, and I really enjoy studying it. The Gnostic stuff is more recent for me than the Old and New Testament, because I've had the Old and New Testament ever since I was a kid. You know, that's what I grew up with. But the Gnostic stuff, like I have the Nag Hammadi, and I have some other books, and you get into archons and all these things, and it's just really fascinating. And the creation of the world's a lot different. You have all these entities and hard to pronounce names. So I don't know. To me, that was very interesting. And much like the Druids, we have a lot of those people that just don't exist. I don't know anybody that is an actual Christian Gnostic. I'm not saying that they don't exist, but I don't know anybody, and I've never met a single solitary person that said they were a Gnostic. Not agnostic, that's a difference, but that are Christian Gnostics. Have you ever met anybody that's a Christian Gnostic? I haven't.
No, I don't think so. There's not for one, there's just not very many people who actually know about it, and the people that know about it are kind of like us. They know it from an academic viewpoint. They're not people who sought it out to be like, I want to be a Gnostic. Oh man, I've heard about it. It sounds fantastic. I'm going to start practicing. You're right. I mean, I've never met anybody like that. I've only known people who know about it academically, as we do, which is really interesting because I'm sure there are some out there. I think I've read online a few places, maybe some comments from people who've claimed to be Gnostics, and then maybe I went to their page to see some things and be like, I don't know about all that. I'm just going to leave you alone and then just keep this 10-foot stick to separate you and me. But
don't come near me. I'm going to jab you with it.
You know, that's not the same as actually having a sit-down conversation with somebody who's truly into it, who's like, yeah, this is exactly what I believe. So if there's a listener out there that's you and we just never knew it, by all means, let us know. We'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, we'll have you on the show.
Mm-hmm.
Also, don't forget, Patreon donors. You guys get a chance to be on the show. We'll talk about what you want to talk about, and we'll put you out there and give you a platform to speak.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of Christian Gnosticism to me is fascinating. And like you said, I never once have seen anybody that has the idea of Sophia and the Pleroma and the idea of one God is Old Testament God and the New Testament's a different one. And anybody that I have ran across that has some of those beliefs are odd. Very odd. I've never met anybody like us that holds those beliefs. And I've noticed that about a lot of this stuff that we talk about, that they are very out there mentally, I guess. And that's not saying that you can't believe in this stuff and be out there mentally. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I feel like with a lot of this stuff, it's more of a cover-up for people to be a certain way rather than the beliefs or the ideas to give them a better viewpoint on life itself. You know, some people use it more of like, hey, look at me, I'm a Christian Gnostic. Look at me. You know what I mean? They want the attention. And I think that Christian Gnostics that do exist probably just want to be left alone, or if they do talk to people, they talk to people in their group.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't put it out there because they don't want to look like they're crazy. I don't think they're crazy. And if that's something you hold, if that's a belief system you hold, and the Nag Hammadi is a sacred text to you, reach out to us. We would love to have you on to talk about Christian Gnosticism. So, next week, episode 184, St. Patrick's Day special. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. As always, why be boring when you could be uncanny? We will see you folks next Friday. Don't forget, 10 to 11. Peace.